If you were standing in the middle of a crowded financial district today, let's say New York, London, Hong Kong, or Dubai, and you watch the screens lighting up with red and green candles, you might think you're simply observing another day in the digital asset markets. You'd see Bitcoin flashing, charts moving, candles forming, and traders reacting with the same old mixture of excitement, fear, greed, and confusion. On the surface, it would look like just another chapter in the story of cryptocurrency, another ripple in an ocean that seems endless. But beneath that familiar surface, beneath the noise, beneath the thousands of retail traders tweeting emojis of rockets and moons, there is something deeper happening, something that very few people ever fully understand, something that has never happened in the history of money or markets or humanity itself. And this moment right now is the moment where that deeper truth is starting to show, not fully, not loudly, but quietly, like a shadow moving behind a curtain. Because something unusual is happening, something subtle, something unexpected, even for those who have lived through every crash, every bubble, every halving, every mania, every despair. It's the kind of moment that only makes sense in hindsight. The kind historians point to years later and say, everything changed right there. And it begins with something that sounds simple. Some people, some very specific people, are taking their profits. Now, at first glance, that sentence might not strike you as special. People take profits all the time. Traders buy low, they sell high. Investors cash out when they are satisfied. Hedge funds rebalance. Institutions close positions. On the surface, that's normal, but what's happening right now is not normal. It's the opposite of normal. It's historic. It's unprecedented. And to understand why, you have to understand what kind of people are selling, and why they could never do this before. Because for the first time ever, these individuals, these whales, these early adopters, these mysterious silent giants walking in the shadows of the digital world, can actually sell without destroying the very market they helped build. For the first time in history, there's enough liquidity, there's enough demand. There's enough money, enough for them to take profits without crashing everything into oblivion. Let that sink in for a moment. This isn't small money. This isn't a few million here or a few million there. We are talking about wealth on a scale that bends the imagination. And yet, these people walk among us. You have passed them in airports. You've sat next to them in cafes. You've seen them at conferences, in hotels, maybe even on a random flight. They look normal. They talk normal. They blend in. And unless you knew who they were, unless you recognized the tiny clues, the subtle signs, there is no way you would ever guess that the person standing in line in front of you at Starbucks owns billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin, not millions, billions, enough to buy skyscrapers, football teams, islands, entire companies silently, quietly, anonymously. People forget how early Bitcoin really is. People forget how small the community was. People forget that back in 2010, 2011, 2012, nobody cared. Nobody believed. Nobody understood. But a few did. A handful, scattered across the world, programmers, cryptographers, students, miners with home-built rigs, people playing around with an experimental internet coin worth almost nothing. Some of these people mined Bitcoin when it was worth less than a cent. Some bought thousands of coins for the price of a cup of coffee. Some stacked early not because they were geniuses, but because they were curious. And today, some of those same people are billionaires. Not crypto influencers and not whale traders, not big Twitter accounts, real whales, silent whales, invisible whales, whales who have held for over a decade, whales who never needed fame, whales who never needed followers, whales who never needed to announce anything, and for the first time in their lives, they can finally exit without breaking the market. Let's talk about one recent example. A wallet quiet, old, dormant started moving. It began selling hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. Quietly, efficiently, without drama. This is not someone panic selling. This is not fear. This is not loss. This is a silent giant taking a breath after holding something longer than most people can imagine. And then there is the example that turned heads around the world. Galaxy Digital handling a $9 billion Bitcoin sale for one person. Think about that. One person, one wallet, $9 billion. At that level, the price of Bitcoin going to $1 million does not matter. If you have $9 billion sitting on your screen, would you care if Bitcoin someday hits $1 million per coin? No, you would not. You wouldn't need to. You'd already have generational wealth, world, changing wealth, planetary, level wealth. You'd say, thank you, I'll take my $9 billion, I'm good. And that's exactly what some people are doing. Not because they've lost faith. Not because they think Bitcoin is dying. Not because they think Bitcoin is over. But simply because for the first time ever they can. For most of Bitcoin's existence, these whales were trapped, not literally, but economically. They could not cash out without causing catastrophic ripple effects. If they sold too fast, the market would collapse instantly. The price would tank. Their coins would lose value before the sell order even finished processing. Imagine holding billions of dollars that you couldn't touch. Imagine watching the world change around you, watching governments react, watching institutions adopt, watching the price explode and crash and explode and crash again, and all the while knowing, if I sell even 5% of what I own, I will nuke the entire market. For years, these early whales were hostages to their own wealth. If they sold too much, the market would panic. If they sold too fast, everything would crash. If they exited too aggressively, the ecosystem they believed in would crumble. So they waited, patiently, quietly, watching from the sidelines, but now things are different. Now the market is bigger. Now institutions are here. Now governments are watching. Now hedge funds are buying dips. Now ETF are absorbing liquidity like sponges. There is finally enough demand to meet their supply. For the first time ever, the whales can exit without making a splash, and this changes everything. It changes how the market behaves. It changes how cycles form. It changes how tops and bottoms work. It changes the psychology of investors. It changes the structure of the entire ecosystem, because when whales take profits, not panic, not dump, but take profits, they create a new dynamic. They create room. They create liquidity. They create demand. They create supply. They create breathing space. And that breathing space is what allows new investors, new participants, new believers to step in. But there's another side to this story, a more mysterious side, a more unsettling side, a side that most people never think about. Because when these whales sell, when these silent giants finally begin to take profits, the average retail investor asks a simple question. If Bitcoin is going to $1 million, why would they ever sell? It sounds like a reasonable question. It sounds logical. It sounds rational. But it misunderstands everything about wealth, risk, psychology, and human behavior. Because when someone has billions, they are playing a completely different game. When you have $50, zero worth of Bitcoin, you dream of $100. When you have $100, you dream of $1 million. When you have $1 million, you dream of $10 million. But when you have $9 billion, you don't care if Bitcoin goes to $1 million. You don't need it to. You don't depend on it. Your life is already changed in every possible way. You've already won, and that changes your incentives completely. You begin to prioritize safety, diversification, liquidity, generational planning, tax optimization, legacy structures, foundations, trusts, long-term asset protection. You stop thinking like a gambler. You stop thinking like a trader. You start thinking like an empire builder. And empire builders take chips off the table, not because they doubt the future, but because they secure the present. Now let's dive deeper into why this moment is historic. Bitcoin has never been this liquid, never been this adopted, never been this institutionalized, never been this recognized, never been this embedded into global finance. For years, Bitcoin was a fringe experiment, then it became a technological curiosity, then it became a financial rebel, then it became a speculative mania, then it crashed, then it rose again, then it matured, then it became digital property. Then it became a hedge, then it became a global store of value, then it became an institutional asset. Now today, it is becoming infrastructure, and as Bitcoin evolves, so do its participants. The early whales who once carried the ecosystem on their backs are finally stepping aside, slowly, quietly, gracefully, allowing a new generation of investors, one backed by institutions, sovereign entities, and global demand to take their place. Think about what that means. For over a decade, Bitcoin was controlled indirectly, silently, by a small number of early adopters. Not in a conspiratorial way, not in a manipulative way, but simply because they owned so much of it. But now that concentration is decreasing, that distribution is widening, that ownership is shifting. The Bitcoin network is decentralizing, not just technically, but financially, and that shift marks the transition from early adoption to global adoption, from experiment to infrastructure, from niche to mainstream, from fragile to robust. And that's why early whales are finally comfortable selling. Because the market is mature enough to handle it, because Bitcoin will not collapse, because demand will not vanish, because institutions will absorb their supply, because the ecosystem is bigger than any individual now, even bigger than the silent giants who once shaped it. But let's return to the psychology of selling, because it reveals something profound. People assume whales are driven by greed, but billionaires are not driven by greed. Greed is a poor man's disease. Billionaires are driven by preservation. They don't seek more, they seek forever, and forever requires stability. Imagine holding $9 billion in an asset that moves 10% in a single day. That is not comfortable, that is not secure, that is not stable. So when these whales take profit, they are not abandoning Bitcoin. They are anchoring their wealth. Some diversify into real estate, some into private equity, some into emerging tech, some into hedge funds, some into traditional markets, some into philanthropy, some into national investments, some into long-term sovereign bonds, some into global infrastructure. This is not selling. This is transformation. A transformation of wealth, a transformation of identity, a transformation of purpose. Because when someone becomes a billionaire, they stop being an investor. They become an institution, and institutions behave differently. But here is the final, most important truth. These whales are not exiting Bitcoin. They're simply resizing their position in a world where Bitcoin is no longer an experiment, but an inevitability. They are not bearish, they are not fearful, they are not doubtful, they are simply free. For the first time in history, they can finally take their profits without fear. They can sell without destroying the market. They can move without shaking the world. They can act without causing chaos. The market is big enough now, strong enough, deep enough, global enough, and that is what marks this moment as historic. Because profit-taking in this context is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of maturity. Bitcoin has grown up. The market has grown up. The world has grown up. And the silent giants who held the early weight of the system are stepping forward, taking what is theirs and allowing the global engine of adoption to accelerate. This is not the end. This is not a sell-off. This is not panic. This is not collapse. This is the passing of a torch. A shift from early believers to global participants. A shift from pioneers to institutions. A shift from fragile beginnings to unstoppable momentum. For the first time ever, the whales can exit without ripples, and that more than any price target, more than any prediction, more than any chart, is what proves that Bitcoin has already won.